the feeling of just joy and relief that there was something to be done about this deep sinfulness, and that when I asked Jesus to forgive me, though I was really young, I remember really believing Jesus lived inside of me, and this would begin a new life for me. But shortly thereafter, my parents got divorced. My dad committed adultery and ended up later marrying the woman he committed adultery with. So this instantly really left me with this plaguing question that I had a hard time getting rid of for a long time, and that was, Jesus, who could I really trust with my life on this earth? That was my question that I really wanted answered. We were left then with a single mom raising 3 daughters. So my mom was a really godly woman, and she followed Jesus wholeheartedly and really sought after him desperately with every last ounce of strength she had in her. But every day was a real struggle. We were really in complete survival mode for most of my young childhood years, just really scraping by both financially and emotionally. One of my sisters actually ran away when she was 15 and fell deeply into the drug life, and we were kind of always awaiting that dreaded phone call of what was going to happen to her. I was, I think, attempting to protect myself from further disappointment as a child, and so I really kind of put this guard up and became really painfully shy towards other people, just other than my mom, feeling like there was no one I could trust. So meeting Ben at college was par for the course in this whole process. So there we were at this college bonfire, and there's Ben sitting in the back of a pickup truck with country music blaring, wearing skin-tight Wrangler jeans and one of those wife-beater cut-off shirts, and he really liked working out a lot, and he just appeared very full of himself. And I thought, I gotta stay away from this guy.
I thought she was into me.
No way. So instead, I started dating some other guy, and it turned out to be super unhealthy. And I actually became very depressed throughout that time. And so after way too long, during my junior year of college, I finally broke it off. This breakup really symbolized something great, though. I really felt like God was calling me to trust him fully to be my father and my husband. A father who would love me and never leave me, and a husband who wouldn't cheat on me or divorce me. And this finally answered the question that I had been plagued with for, since I was 6 and my dad left, that there really was actually no one on this earth that I could fully trust. But I could trust Jesus, and he was there all along and had been with me throughout this whole process. God really wanted me to completely surrender all of my trust to him. I told God at that point I would do whatever he asked of me, even if that meant being single for the rest of my life, then all glory to God.
Yeah, Betts was totally right about me. I was a cocky athlete. On the outside, probably people thought I had it all together. But on the inside, I really was. I was a 20-year-old little boy that was just insecure, afraid, alone. I felt like everything I was pursuing was just failing. And so here's how I got there. When I was 10 years old, my parents forced me to go to this church camp that I didn't want to go to because I didn't know anybody. And I was sitting there in a revival service in a building of probably a room about like this size. And the guy up front was preaching about hell. And it was the first time I can remember as a young boy actually understanding the gravity of what hell meant. And he described it with these flames lapping up around everybody that's there. And I was terrified to go there. And he offered the way of salvation through Jesus Christ, that if you believe in Jesus and ask for forgiveness, he will forgive you. And for whatever reason, at 10 years old, I think I understood that I needed that. And I remember going down to the altar, kind of just off to the side. I remember sitting down like on my knees and just crying and praying and weeping and asking God to forgive me. And genuinely believing that God did. And my instant reaction was, I got to go tell all my friends, all my baseball buddies. I got to go tell them because they need to hear this message, and they're going to be so excited that they can cry and pray and ask for forgiveness too. I don't know what I was thinking, but I went back, and I don't even remember who I talked to. But I do remember that the first guy I talked to made fun of me. And then all the rest of the guys started making fun of me. And for me, at that time, it wasn't worth it. So I kind of just went in, actually for the next 11 years, kind of into this hiding, where I was around Christian people. I'd kind of put this face on and act like I was a Christian. But when I was around my baseball buddies, I'd make fun of Christians just so I could be popular. And it was kind of this miserable state of existence that I thought I had one foot in the kingdom and one foot in the world. I really had both feet in the world. And I just was exhausted from just kind of playing this chameleon part for so long that in college it got really bad. I finally said, I'm tired. I'm tired of playing this show. I'm just going to go all in with the world. And all my buddies seem to be having fun. They're partying. I'm going to do it. And about the same time, I was giving my life to baseball. The goal of my life, the purpose of my life was to be a professional baseball player. That's what I wanted to do. In Washington State University, I know you guys are UW fans, or some of you are, like, it's the enemy, but Washington State recruited me to play baseball there. And so I went there, and I didn't even think that I wouldn't make the team. But at tryouts, I was a pitcher. I was standing up on the mound, looking at the catcher's mitt, and it felt like there was just this wall in front of the catcher's mitt. I didn't throw hard, but I was known for control. That was kind of my forte in baseball. And I couldn't throw a strike. And I got cut from the team. And it felt like God took away the thing that was most important to me. And I was angry, I was bitter, I was confused. And after that, I just thought, well, I'm just going to do what I want to do. If God's not going to take care of me, I'm just going to go do what I want. And so during that year at WSU, I just gave my life to partying. I gave my life to just debauchery and thinking that, I'm just going to have fun, I'm going to have pleasure. And it just made it worse and worse. I got really empty. Ended up transferring to a Christian school my sophomore year, and this Christian school, ironically, all the people on the baseball team were like the black sheep of the school. So it was a good school, Christian people there, but the baseball team were a bunch of guys like me. And I went in there, and I kind of led the charge, like I was leading these black sheep into bad places. But there's one guy on the team, a guy named Dan Hefner, and Dan was different than all of us. Dan had peace. Dan wasn't empty. He actually cared about other people, and he wasn't just nice to people so he can get something from them. He was humble. He was a good athlete, and I was the opposite of that. And it took me about 6 months of just watching Dan and studying him. And to be completely honest, I wanted to be popular, and Dan was more popular than me. And so I remember skipping out on his wedding over Christmas that semester because I didn't want to give him support because I wanted to be popular. That's how messed up I was back then. But about 6 months later, actually during the baseball season, I went up to Dan, and I was just broken. I was just like, man, I'm so tired of living this lie. And I asked him the question, Dan, what's the difference between you and me? Like, why do you have so much peace? And how can you care about people so much? And why am I so empty? And he gave me this cliche statement, and I'll never forget. He said, I rolled my eyes. He said, Ben, I've got Jesus and you don't. I'm like, man, I've heard that my whole life. I've heard that my whole life. And then the next thing he said, though, hit me right in the heart. He said, Ben, you know a lot about Jesus, but you don't actually know Jesus. And that was exactly right. I'd heard sermon after sermon, and my parents taught me about Jesus, and other people taught me about Jesus, but I didn't actually know him. And so for the next 9 months, I read the entire Bible to try to figure out who was Jesus. I remember sitting in the library of our college campus, and Matthew 16 is what I remember. Matthew 16 says, if anyone wishes to save his life, he'll lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And I remember thinking that I could give my life to baseball and sports and girls and whatever I want and lose it in pleasure and career and money and lose it for all of eternity. Or I could give up everything on this earth and give my life for all of eternity. And I was afraid, for whatever reason, I was afraid of three things specifically. I was afraid that God would make me a missionary in Africa someday and I'd have to eat bugs. I was afraid that I would live in poverty in America and just be poor my whole life. And I was afraid that I'd have to be single the rest of my life. And I don't know why those were my three great, it probably just revealed my value system back then. But I was afraid of that. And I remember thinking, but it's not worth it. Like if God makes me do those things, it's totally worth it. I remember having this mental image of just pushing the chips across the table and saying, God, I'm all in. Whatever you want, blank check on my life, whatever you want me to do, I'm all in. And so at that moment, Dan really picked me up and started to invest in me. For about the next year and a half, he kind of established me in the basics and really started to disciple me. And I didn't get really far in my development. I think I was just about established in the basics. I was kind of having a quiet time and knew how to pray. And I kind of knew kind of the general idea of what it means to follow Jesus. And then Dan graduated. And he kind of left me to take over the baseball Bible study, which was just two of us, me and Dan, and then maybe a couple other non-committal guys. The next year, God started doing miracles. It was unbelievable. 23 of the 24 guys on our baseball team became wholehearted followers of Jesus. They were involved in in-depth Bible study. We went from being the black sheep of the school to the spiritual leaders of the campus. That started spilling over into other people's relationships. And it was unbelievable. I mean, it was just miraculous what God was doing through one man's investment in another. And that was the time when I think I really understood what Jesus was doing with the 12. Before, because I asked Dan, like, why did you invest in me like this? And he said, well, it's because Jesus invested in a few men and gave his life to them, poured his life into them for 3 years. And when Dan was at Northern Iowa, a guy named Jim Luby invested in Dan for 2 years and poured into him. And Dan said, I'm just paying this forward. I'm just investing in you the way that Jesus invested in his men and the way that Jim invested in me. And the light bulb just clicked. And I thought, you know what? For the rest of my life, this is what I'm going to give my life to. I'm going to give my life to investing in people the way that Jesus did and the way that Dan did invest in me. And everything changed for me. And then I look back and I remember God took away the most important thing to me in the world, which was baseball at the time, to give me something so much greater, which was his son, Jesus Christ, and the mission of helping other people. And so God gave me a new mission. I was all in.
From my perspective, it was really amazing to see. So I watched the baseball team go from sitting in the cafeteria day after day, kind of gathered around, laughing and joking about all the vile things they'd done that past weekend, to this change that happened now. Those same guys sitting around the table in the cafeteria, now with their Bibles open and talking about what Jesus was teaching them. It really blew my mind to see it. So many people on that campus were being radically transformed to be wholehearted followers of Jesus. And it really seemed to be through one man's faith, Dan Heathner, that Ben mentioned. So unbeknownst to each other, back to the storyline for Ben and I, we both swore off dating permanently and marriage. And we were committed at that point to be solely following Jesus wholeheartedly. But then what do you think happened next? Because we're standing here. So we ended up starting talking to each other through some strange circumstances. And it was really intense from the very beginning because we had both made some pretty big mistakes in past relationships, so we weren't playing around. We really had some awkward and difficult conversations about anything you can think of. Any conversation was fair game on the table. It was kind of painful looking back. But then one day Ben sat me down and told me he was thinking about joining the Army. So backstory on this, I do not come from a military family. So that was a very big deal to me. And by the way, the first date Ben ever took me on was to see the movie Black Hawk Down.
Yeah, some pretty mad skills back then. I really knew how to reel them in. Black Hawk Down.
Yeah, so the whole Black Hawk Down thing, like, I know this sounds silly, but I really had in my mind, after seeing that movie and then bringing up Army, that when he would go to work every day, if he joined the Army, it would be some scary rendition of Black Hawk Down. You know, it sounds crazy, but that I was really terrified. So 3 of my greatest fears always were to marry a firefighter, a policeman, or a soldier. And I think I also had a 4th fear, which was to permanently move away from home from my mom. So I cried when he told me he was thinking about joining the Army. And then once I gathered my emotions, I felt like God was telling me, well, you should tell him that wherever he will now be my home. So I did.
Yeah, and that nobody ever shared with me Man Mission Made, if you've ever gone through that in Genesis 2. I didn't know that I was supposed to look for a wife who would follow me in this mission. But when she said home is wherever you are, and she was willing to follow me in her greatest fears in life, I just knew that sounded right.
So that was the beginning of God using our relationship to refine me. God was really testing my level of trust in him through Ben. So many things that Ben felt like God was asking him to do were way outside of my comfort zone. For example, we were newly married and we moved into this tiny little apartment, and there was this couple who needed a place to stay. Here's the kicker. They had 1 kid, she was pregnant, and they had some really significant marital issues they were working through. So before even asking me, you can guess, Ben committed to letting them live with us for an undefined period of time. And so they squeezed into the other bedroom of our apartment. It was really uncomfortable for me. And I was a little upset that he didn't ask me first. But when I thought about it and all his reasons why he had them move in, I really couldn't argue with it. We even then began to really realize we didn't want to just attend Christian events with people. We wanted to figure out how to share life with them and help them grow. But even though we knew how to serve people, we really didn't know how to help people grow in Christ. All we really knew was how to try accountability groups with them and take them through different Bible study curriculums. But we were still really under-equipped when it came to actual discipleship.
Yeah, and that's how I felt too. From the time we graduated college, actually even before that when Dan left, all the way until we got to Fort Bragg, which is about 4 years or so, we just kind of floundered spiritually. We didn't really know what to do with people other than to serve them. So we just did lots of activities, lots of serving, lots of events, and lots of things, and we felt like we were just spinning our wheels, like working really hard, not seeing any real fruit. We had a general idea of the vision of discipleship, and like we were supposed to do that, but no real practical tools to do that. In fact, somebody told us one time that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, that described us to a T. Like we had one tool, like, hey, let's do Bible study together. We didn't really know how to share life with folks, to invest in them, to identify their need and meet the tool. And when Dan was investing in me, I was so new. I wasn't thinking, oh, how could I capture this stuff and pass it on to somebody else? I was just thinking, this is amazing. What's going on? And I didn't write down a lot of the things that he taught me. So we just kind of floundered. And when we got to Benning, I commissioned, when we got to Benning, Fort Benning, it was like kind of the same way for the entire time we were there. As soon as we were leaving Fort Benning, this couple that we knew there, a Christian couple, gave us this list of names. He said, because we knew nobody at Fort Bragg, they said, if you go to Fort Bragg, you should look up this person, this person, this person. And we're like, well, where are we supposed to find them? And they said, well, if you go to this chapel, you might be able to find them. So we went to Fort Bragg the first week. We were pretty desperate for fellowship. The first week we were there, we showed up at this chapel. It was actually in a gymnasium, and they made all the new people stand up, and we were kind of uncomfortable and like wave. And so Betts and I are standing up as a new couple, and then they did the meet and greet time after that. So we're standing there, meet and greet, and out of the corner of our eye, from like the stands, we saw these people, this couple, like leap off the stands and like make a beeline, and it looked like they were coming right at us, like straight at us, like stiff-arming people through the aisle. Like, what's going on? I was about ready to like either run or like start swinging. They came up to us and they said, "Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm Marie." And then I kind of got, like, that sounds familiar. So I pulled out this little list in my back pocket. Is your last name Hatch? And they said, yeah. And then they're freaked out because we know their last name. But they invited us over to our house that afternoon, and we met the rest of the people on that list. And Sean and Marie basically took us under their wing for the next year and began to invest in us. Sean and Marie are now Navs staff at West Point, overseeing the ministry there. So it's just been neat to see what God's done in their lives.
So yeah, like Ben said, Sean and Marie really did take us under their wing for the next year. And the best way to describe that year was God used Sean and Marie to put his finger on every single lordship issue in our lives. We thought we had a lot of this Christian life figured out, and no, we really didn't. They pointed out how Jesus wasn't Lord over our finances, our marriage, our family planning, Ben's career, how we spent our free time, how we hosted, you name it, anything and everything you can think of. Though Sean and Marie loved us really, really well, it was no doubt one of the most painful times in our Christian walk to date, today. But however, it's really exactly what we needed at the time. So it sounds really hard, and it was, but it was perfect for what we needed. Marie shared the pipeline with me, and faithful, available, teachable. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. It was very humbling because I thought, nope, neither one of those is me. And I specifically remember Marie challenging me on how I loved people. She asked me to consider what I do with all the hours in my day. I had 2 children at the time. And she said, have you ever thought about how you can incorporate other women into your life throughout the day with the time that you have? And I really had never thought about that. And to be honest, that thought kind of terrified me at the time. And then I really... Sorry. So then the second thing was she would ask me, okay, when you walk in a room, kind of a room like this, and you see someone you know, do you immediately go and sit next to that person so that you can just chat and feel comfortable with them? Or do you actually go and find someone you've never met, sit next to them, try to get to know them and hear their story? Again, that I had never even thought about loving someone that way. So it really just exposed my just lack of understanding of, I really didn't have a clue of how to love people. So if I were to describe this next season of our lives from then until now, basically encompassing the past 13 years, God has been putting his finger on everything we value on this earth and forcing us to choose between him and that person or thing. We understood his vision for spiritual generations and wanted to invest deeply in one man or one woman. But throughout the past 13 years, he's given us these clear forks in the road. We could choose him and his vision, or we could choose our own way. It's definitely been really hard and really uncomfortable, but it has been deeply rewarding too.
Yeah, not only was God putting his finger on every worship area, he was actually stripping me of my sense of pride. And I'm going to tell a quick story in just a minute about that. But up to this point, I've been very successful in just about everything I did. I mean, I told the story about the failure in baseball, but everything else seemed to be going really well. Top of my class, honor graduate, all these different things. And when I got to my unit at Fort Bragg, I felt like a failure. It was just not going well. My company was extremely dark. In fact, when I walked in to meet my platoon sergeant for the first time, I walked in like him and all the squad leaders were smoking in the building. It's like, oh, sir, you weren't supposed to see that. A couple weeks later, he found out I was a Christian and was playing these very inappropriate videos like all the time in the office and tried to get me to watch them. It was just every day I went to work, it just felt like I was in a war zone, like just an oppression, and I just wasn't doing well. And I felt like I just felt depressed. And worse than that, I think the thing that got me even more is that I was trying to invest in people, and every single person I tried to invest in just tanked spiritually. In fact, the first 3 guys I tried to invest in were just disasters. And I'll tell just one of the stories. So I'm going to change his name just for the sake of the story. Nobody will probably know him. But the only guy in my company that wanted to hear about Jesus was a guy named John. So John and I were fellow platoon leaders, and John would talk to me about Jesus. The problem is, John was kind of, to use a word, like he was the scapegoat of our battalion. So about 800 people, if you'd ever walk up to a group of guys talking or laughing or joking about something, you'd walk up, they're usually joking and making fun of Carlos. And Carlos just probably wasn't cut out for the infantry. He would kind of stay up all night playing video games, and he'd fall asleep in his car in the morning during PT. His platoon would have to go wake him up and say, hey, sir, you can come do PT with us. And if that happens once in an infantry battalion, you're done. And that happened multiple times with him. And so it was just sad. Like, he was such a nice guy, but it was just a struggle for him. But he was the only guy that would talk to me about Jesus. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We walked into the dining facility, and at that time in the Army, it's when the officers and senior NCOs actually ate in a separate room in the dining facility. We had to go eat in our own room. I remember getting my tray, and I was pretty new to the battalion, walking in through the doors of this room and looking at this horrific sight. And here was this long table of all the cool guys, all the cool officers sitting there with one open seat. And at the corner of my eye, and I almost wish I didn't see it back then, but at the corner of my eye I saw John sitting in the back corner with one open seat. And in just the flash of time, I got to say, God, please don't make me sit next to John. You know what's going to happen if I sit next to John. If I can sit with these cool guys and get this good reputation, I'll have so much more influence for you. Please don't make me sit next to John. It'll ruin my reputation. And that was the thing. That was the thing that God wanted to put my finger on. He said, Ben, you could either choose me, or you could choose your reputation. I'll probably destroy you by it. And so I'm there, like, my life flashing before my eyes, and I'm like, okay, I'll go sit next to John. So I sat next to him, and exactly what my fear was happened. Guilty by association. I started kind of becoming one of the people that the people made fun of. I'd walk up, and everybody just kind of get silent. And then I started making mistakes, because I almost like self-fulfilling prophecy. I started making some dumb mistakes, and it was really, really tough. And all of that would have been cool if John would have come to Christ and had this miraculous story of transformation, but he didn't. In fact, he rejected me, kind of abandoned our relationship, and worse, he rejected Christ. And so I felt like I gave up my reputation for nothing. So God still had some work to do on me.
Yeah, it was really, really miserable to watch from my perspective. There was almost nothing I could do to encourage him, no matter what I tried. He came home every day, even more and more dejected and discouraged. And I really couldn't believe what God was doing to strip him away. I was literally at some points laying down on the floor before God, pleading with him, please just take away this suffering. And it seemed like God wasn't answering. I wondered where that gifted spiritual leader that I thought I had married had gone. I even began trying to take the reins spiritually and step up and just take these decisions and make things happen, because it appeared that Ben didn't have the capacity to do it. I was really fearful of what would happen if I didn't. I know this was the last thing I needed to do to help him out. Now I know that. I didn't know that at the time, though.
Yeah, and so about that time we got orders to deploy for a year. It ended up being 15 months. And I think even though I look back at that last year, that first year at Fort Bragg, as just a really, really difficult time, God was clearing the house. He was clearing out all these idols in my life to make a vessel for use. And so about that time, I was really excited to deploy, not to leave my family, but to kind of have a fresh start, to like, okay, God, let's reset. I'm ready to go. Like I've given up my reputation to a certain degree, time, finances, family, all this stuff that God had put his finger on. I said, okay, I'm ready to go. So deployment was a time for me, like, I can't wait to go memorize more scripture, to read the Bible more, to spend time in Bible study for the first time in my life, really deep Bible study. And I wanted to see revival. Like, I was so excited to see revival. In fact, I was praying for our whole battalion, 900 people, to come to Christ. I remember meeting with Andrew Stroud, some of you may know Andrew, and saying, Andrew, I'm praying for revival. And Andrew said, have you ever thought about just praying for one guy? And my response was, Andrew, we need to have great faith. Like, we need to pray for lots of guys to come to Christ. But then as I thought about it, I thought, that was what God used to change an entire college campus, just one guy's faith. And so I changed my prayer to praying for just one guy. God, would you give me a man after your own heart? And so there I was on the 747 flying over to Iraq for 12 months, reading my Bible in the airplane. We have our kit on, our weapons. We're just flying over there. And this guy sitting across the aisle from me, next to me, said, hey, is your name Ben? And I almost corrected him and said, no, it's Lieutenant Kayser to you, but I didn't. He said, and just as awkwardly as this, I can remember the exact phrase. He said, hey, would you disciple me on this deployment? I'm like, what? Who are you? So we talked, and that's exactly what happened. For the next 8 months, this guy named Donnie and me shared life together. It was the first time I think I'd ever experienced probably life-on-life discipleship, because back in college I thought discipleship was leading a small group. When I got to Bragg, I thought discipleship was just meeting over lunch and breakfast a bunch of times. But in Iraq, I discovered that discipleship is one man imparting his entire life to somebody else. And that's what Donnie and I spent 4 or 5 days a week together. We'd eat in the dining facility together. He was enlisted, I was officer. We'd sit at the dining facility with Bibles open. Command Sergeant Major walked by, battalion commander, company commanders. Nobody said a word to us. And I'm blown away that nobody said a word to us. But we worked out together. We watched, we listened to sermons together. We went to chapel together. We had quiet times together. We memorized scripture together. We shared life together. And it was a beautiful thing. The only problem is, about 8 months into the deployment, I got a different job working on staff, and he went back down to the line and started going out on more missions. And because of that, we kind of got separated geographically. And I don't think it was just because we were separated, but Donnie started to fall back into the old lifestyle, and he had a pretty rough background. And I saw him start to fall away spiritually. And I'm going to finish this story a little bit later, because it's pretty miraculous what God ended up doing, unbelievable.
So during that deployment, God was doing his own work in my life. I saw Ben growing like crazy, like you just described, and really becoming that godly leader, just re-emerging, and that I thought I had married, in just amazing ways better than I ever imagined, actually. But it really also kind of made me feel disillusioned. And I didn't exactly understand why at first, because each time he talked to me, he'd pray with me, and he'd share, everything he was learning, and he was just so excited about what God was doing. So why was I so upset? Well, I think God was answering my prayers, but in my insecurity, I was thinking, when he was here, home with me, he was really struggling, and all my efforts to help him seemed to be only making things worse. And now he leaves me and grows more rapidly than I've ever seen him. I remember going to God and asking him, does this sudden growth I'm seeing in Ben have anything to do with the fact that he's away from me? And like a knife to the heart, I remember God showing me clearly, yes, I had played a large part in hindering Ben's growth. So Proverbs 14:1 hit me like a ton of bricks. The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish one tears it down with her own hands. I had become a foolish and contentious wife. I didn't know I was, but God was revealing to me that I was. God was now building him back up since I had torn him down so much. God was doing his good work while I was off the scene. Ouch. I repented of that to God and told him I was ready to trust him to lead me through in following Ben, even when I didn't understand what God was doing. I also repented to Ben and told him that out of my deep trust for God, I was ready to now trust Ben to lead.
Yeah, the ironic thing, I would have never thought of Betts as a contentious wife. I just thought that wives are supposed to kind of question their husband's decision, every decision, and most do in our society. However, I didn't realize how much she was actually stripping me of my sense of confidence. I would have never been able to communicate it this way at the time, but looking back, I felt like a failure as a leader in the Army, and even worse, I felt like a failure as a leader of our home. No matter what decision I made or attempted to make, I was always faced with a barrage of rebuttals from Betts. And they weren't mean or angry. They were just rooted in mistrust, and I could sense that. So I stopped making decisions. I just stopped making decisions as a leader of our home and started deferring to Betts on everything. So on the deployment, when she realized God showed her what she was doing, she kind of went to the other extreme and just stopped giving me counsel on anything. When I would need to make a decision, or we'd need to make a decision, I'd say, hey, I just kind of go to defer to her. What should we do? And she would say, Ben, I trust you. I trust that you'll be able to figure that out with the Lord. And I'm an infantry guy at heart, so it took me a little while to catch on. That was new to me. But two things. So two things that her godly, genuine submission did for me. Number one, I think it deepened my walk in the Lord, because instead of automatically deferring to my wife, I had to go to God and wrestle with Him through these pretty significant decisions, life decisions we were making. It forced me to go to Him. Number two, instead of feeling emasculated, I started feeling like a leader, like someone really wanted to follow me as I followed Christ. And so this growing confidence actually started to affect other areas of my leadership. I started to feel more confident as a leader in the Army. And actually, I started feeling more confident as somebody that could make disciples, because somebody was willing to follow me as I followed Christ. So Betts is, in addition to that, Betts was making a concerted effort, not just to follow me, but actually to learn from me. I never experienced that before from anybody really in my life. So I tell people all the time that God was using Betts probably more than anything else to develop me as a leader. I'm eternally grateful. Her impact on my life is unparalleled in this area, so thank you, sweetie.
I think by submitting to Ben, my respect for him actually grew a lot deeper. And while I never had this ulterior motive in mind, he actually started loving me a lot more affectionately. We would go on dates, and he would ask me, how am I doing loving you? And I would say, good. He'd say, no, really, I want you to give me specific feedback on this. And so I would.
Tough feedback.
But it was truly amazing to see the transformation that God was doing in our marriage. We never would have said at the time we had a dysfunctional marriage, but looking back, we really did.
Yeah, I think one of the things we realized looking back, we were operating at a very low capacity because we weren't operating the way that God designed marriage. And probably the other big challenge was on the 15-month deployment, we were operating as individuals. We would talk over the phone, but I was laboring as a single person. She was laboring as a single gal, meeting with people. So when I got back from the deployment, there was a totally new concept for us to labor together. And we really didn't know what that was supposed to look like. But as we prayed about that, there was an image that came to my mind of just putting a revolving door on our house. It seemed like our house is probably the best way for us to labor together. And so, but that was kind of overwhelming to us because neither her nor I came from families that hosted. We never actually saw that modeled. Sean and Marie did a fair amount, but we didn't live with them. We didn't see what it looked like for them to prepare for that stuff too much. So we thought, well, we'll just start hosting every other Friday night. Have people over to home, teach them something. And it was a lot. Like that whole week before we hosted that night, Betts was kind of stressing out about the meal. That whole day on Friday, she was cleaning the house, like scrubbing everything, like the backside of the toilet, and like making sure it was perfect. The meal was like elaborate, like this huge spread of stuff. And so every other week was just a lot for us. But we started to figure out to simplify things, and then it became every week, and then we started hosting every Friday, and also having people over to our house once a week. All this still while we weren't necessarily just laboring as a couple. We were both laboring and meeting up and following up with folks man to man. I remember on active duty, my goal was to max out my breakfasts and lunches. I was hoping to get 10 man-to-mans during the week, every breakfast and every lunch. And I didn't get that all the time. It was probably more like 5, 6, or 7. But I remember really, really being passionate about follow-up, and Betts was too. Actually, Matt Allen and Matt Hill were folks that kind of came out of that time, just really, I think, started sharing life together, and God did some miracles in our lives back then. It was really neat.
So I didn't have nearly as many individual man-to-mans as Ben did because of my work with my kids. But I was still able to meet up with ladies throughout the week and at our house when we hosted. God continued to stretch and refine me, and He still does, through what God asked us to do in order to more effectively labor in His mission field while having a few more kids through this time. After working through my initial shock and horror at the idea, eventually we started having single guys live with us. And we also continued to have a few more kids. And then we started having families live with us along with those singles, and we had another kid. Then we kind of became a commune. Not really, it's a joke, but some people might say that. Seriously though, there were so many forks in the road where God was testing our loyalty to Him and His mission for our lives. We oftentimes chose the wrong direction, but the times God did allow us to choose Jesus and His mission over our comfort level, He has really miraculously increased our capacity. But it didn't happen overnight. This is a process that happened over the course of decades, not days.
Yeah. And just to finish off Donnie's story, I'll end on this one, because I think the lessons we learned from this relationship kind of encapsulates our entire ministry. And so when we got back from deployment, Donnie tanked hard. Like, he was drinking every night. There's probably drugs involved in that. Wasn't answering my phone calls, text messages. And this is the guy that I baptized in deployment, the first guy that led to Christ, the first guy that I poured my life into. So it was just sad to see that happen. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And then about a year after that, I was in command, and Donnie wasn't in my company. But Donnie had done some really bad stuff, and that company commander was actually starting the chapter paperwork to chapter him out of the Army, and not with an honorable discharge. And so here I am, just sad about that. And then, almost like a sick joke of God, Donnie got transferred to my company. And so I remember getting this chapter paperwork that wasn't completed, that wasn't signed, and thinking, oh no, this is in my lap now. So I went to the BC, the battalion commander, and I said, hey sir, I don't know, this is not my guy. Whatever you want me to do with him, I'll do, just because I didn't want to make the decision on this. And he looked at me and he said, Ben, I trust you. You make the call. And I was just so here I am with this guy that I poured my life into, sitting across the table with a pen, knowing I was going to chapter him out of the Army. I thought, God, what's the point of this? What is the point of discipleship if I'm going to ruin these people's lives that you gave me? What is the point of this? I wanted to quit. And I remember thinking about Abraham standing over Isaac with the knife and just waiting for the ram in the thicket. God, just let somehow take this away. I don't want to do it. He didn't. They chaptered him out, and things got worse. I loved him so much. It's the first guy I ever poured my life into. And Donnie just kept getting worse and worse. And about a couple of years, I kind of kept up with him through some of my soldiers. And a couple of years after that, I get a phone call from Donnie out of the blue. And Donnie calls me up, and my first thought was I got to bail him out of jail because he probably did something really bad. I was thinking about how much money I had in the bank to pay for it. But he didn't say that. He said, Ben, can we get together? I was still active duty at the time, and so we showed up on Fort Bragg at a food court area. In a sea of green, Donnie walked in with dreadlocks and a little beanie, craziness. And we sat down, and Donnie told me this amazing, miraculous story, a prodigal son story about God pulled him up out of the muck, set him back on his feet, and he was excited to follow Jesus again. Now, I'll never forget the thing that went to my mind was when God was telling me why he did that. And what came to my mind was, Ben, when you had everything to do with Donnie, he tanked. We had nothing to do with him. I raised him up and set him back on his feet, and he's healthier and stronger and hungrier for me than he's ever been. Don't you ever think that I need you to do this. Don't you ever think that I need you to make disciples. It is a great privilege that I'm allowing you to be part of this process, but I don't need you. And that really encapsulates the entire story of our ministry. God doesn't need us. In fact, it's only by His grace that He's allowed us to be part of this amazing process of investing our lives in people. And we're grateful for it. And the cool thing is, we feel like we're just getting started. So praise God for it. Let me pray for us. Let me pray just to give God the glory for what He's doing. And then we'll open up for Q&A if you have any questions. Father, we do thank you. This is your story. This is a story of your amazing grace in a couple people's lives that are just messed up and selfish. How you brought us back to yourself, how you redeemed us, how you gave us a new purpose, a new mission, a new life, a new hope, a new calling. And Father, we're just grateful for what you've done for us. We're just grateful to be able to tell our story, your story, the story of how you've changed our lives. And Father, the story about how you've involved us in your mission and your purpose on this earth. And we're thankful for it. Father, I pray that you give all of us in this room strength to continue pouring our lives out for other people. Strength that comes only from being connected to the vine. Father, I know that all of us need to be pruned. Father, I pray that you be gentle in that pruning, but that you be precise, and you cut out of us things in our lives that are obstacles to us loving people with all of our hearts. Father, we give our lives to you by your grace and by your mercy. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, we just wanted to open it up real quick. If you guys have any questions for Ben or Betts as far kind of specific towards their testimony, whether it's maybe something that like a certain phase that they were going through as they're trying to follow Jesus, or if there's anything that you want to ask, like is there anything that helped you or anything that you really wrestled with in certain areas? I just want to open up for a few minutes to let you guys ask any questions.
Yeah, we're cutting into Frisbee time, so just keep that in mind.
So, Ben, I'm curious, as you look over a progression of lordship decisions and pruning, when you look back at it, those decisions, they were small at first and they got bigger and bigger decisions. But at the time, did the decisions, they stay as difficult, or did they get more difficult with time at that present moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've asked Betts sometimes, because it feels like I'm just not growing. It feels like the same lessons keep coming up. I keep making the same mistakes. God keeps having to put his finger on the same things in my life: reputation, career, finances, trusting him with ministry. And what Betts has told me is that while God's still maybe kind of putting his finger on the same things over and over again, our response time is different. So instead of kind of floundering for a week or a month or a year on this issue and kind of wrestling back from God, we're quicker to give it up. So I'd say that it depends on the circumstance. Some lessons that he's brought in our lives are absolutely miserable and difficult and challenging. Others are minor. But overall, I feel like the way that God's been so gracious to us is to let our response time to kind of let go of that be shorter. And so just a quick story about that. So we just built a house in our backyard for the purpose of more people living in our house. That's why she was joking about being a commune, because we kind of are. But we have a couple living back there right now. People donated almost $65,000 to build this house in the backyard. And we got a couple notices from our HOA saying you can't park in the street. And we're thinking, man, if we can't park in the street, like there's no way we can use this house for the way that it's designed. And instead of me praying and saying, God, give us this house, like people just donated all this money to it, and like this is a great resource. My first response, and this is totally God's grace, my first response was, maybe we should plan on moving and giving up this house and trusting him. And I would have never done that 10 years ago. I would have wrestled for probably months and stressed out about it. My first response, and I told Betts, Betts, we might need to call a realtor tomorrow. And she freaked out. She's like, no, we can't move, because if we move, it'll take like 6 months out of our lives to pack everything up and find a house. And all the people that are living with us have to do the same thing.
It took me a few more minutes sometimes.
But we prayed. I prayed. I said, God, if you want us to move, we will start the process tomorrow. And so Betts called the lawyer's office the next day, and it turned out to be nothing. But that was an example. Like in the past, that would have taken me months of kind of wrestling the back with God. So the lessons are significant, not significant, but I think God has been so gracious to let the response time be shorter. Frisbee time.
What college did you end up?
Olivet Nazarene University, about an hour south of Chicago. Small NAIA school. Played baseball there my 4 years. It was a great time. It was a fun time.
Ben, speaking of college, you said you felt like you were living sort of a double life, like you had one foot with Jesus and one foot in the world, but really both feet were in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand a little more on what that process felt like, getting out of that, and just the influence of people in your life, and but really the influence of God on your life, like what he was molding?
Yeah, I think it just, kind of the living that double life just got so exhausting for me. It would be fun for a night, then I'd wake up miserable and empty the next day. I got actually pretty depressed. I remember, I never had suicidal ideations, but I remember threatening it to my friends, mainly just because I felt like I wasn't getting attention from them. It got pretty bad. And so when I transferred to that Christian college, and I saw a man who was actually walking with Jesus and had peace. That was the first time I think I'd ever seen somebody not just bring a Bible to Sunday service, but actually walk with Jesus throughout the week and have peace and actually be humble and care about other people and have just a genuine relationship with Jesus. And so I think that was the thing that God opened up my mind to. In fact, Jeremiah 2:13 was the verse that I think I came to Christ on. It says, my people have committed two great evils. they've forsaken me, the fountain of living water, and have hewn for them broken cisterns that hold no water. And Dan told me, Ben, you've hewn for yourself broken cisterns. Those cisterns are baseball, girls, success, academics, pleasure, and every one of those cisterns has been broken. And you know it, like your life is a wreck. And he was right, and you have not pursued me, the fountain of living water. And so I think that verse is probably, in just Dan's life, are the two things that probably kind of jolted me out of this hard heart, kind of indifference towards the Lord.
A question for Betts. Having been so time-consuming, can you just give us, like, for those of us that have, say, 2 to 5 kids, maybe some of your more creative ways to get time with women while still having all of your kids with you?
I think as soon as we had maybe 4 or more, I kind of had to stop being able to make time in the day, because it would kind of get things off track to be able to actually be the helper that I needed to be for everything else to keep going. But I think before that, I would schedule time during nap time, at least like an hour of the nap time, and that worked out really well for a while. And then it has morphed more into having people live with us has been a really natural way. Even years ago, some of you may know Ashley Smith. She lived with us for a period of time, and some other gals where there was windows of opportunity. That really worked really well, and that continues to work well today. To just be actually in life, it's less segmented time, but there's so many great conversations that happen over life. And then I think also just having people over for dinner regularly. The people that I needed to get more consistent time with, just having them over for dinner has been huge. And sometimes just sitting off in a different spot because it gets loud and crazy, where Ben and I would kind of coordinate that, that you go sit there so you can actually talk to her, has worked out really well. And just really maximizing on the time that I get. It takes a lot more thought and planning and preparation. That, okay, if I have 10 minutes with this gal, that I see her for a sidebar conversation, what is the most important thing to follow up with her? It just takes a lot more preciseness. There's not the extra time before, after, all this. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, and kind of just from my perspective, I think probably once a week we'll have a conversation where Betts feels guilty for not investing in more ladies and doing more. And I think my big responsibility to just guide her or guard her, protect her, is tell her, taking that pressure off. You don't have to meet with all these ladies. You have 7 little disciples in her home, and that is an eternal work, and it's a beautiful work. And if you want to, you might have a little bit of space here, but you don't feel any pressure to have to go run a ladies' ministry. And that was then obviously more recent. I think when we had fewer kids, we had more capacity, or she did for that. But she always feels pressure to go do more. And I say, honey, you are doing the most amazing eternal work that you can do right now. So don't sacrifice our children for this thing. All right, Frisbee time. Thank you very much.